The lie reached her ears before the champagne ever reached the table. Imani Carter heard. It registered exactly what it would cost the man it was aimed at, and kept gliding across the floor without so much as a hitch in her step or a ripple in the glasses. That control was the whole job. You learned it your first week serving at the Video, Atlanta's most untouchable. Rooftop, 42 floors above Buckhead. The kind of place the rich treated like a private confession booth with a wine list. You taught your face to go smooth and empty while your pulse was doing something else entirely. She placed the flutes at table 4, gave the table a smile that meant nothing, and slipped away. Then she drifted back toward table 9, and this time she let herself really listen. But, hold on a second, because I want to ask you something before this goes any further. Have you ever been standing right there, close enough to touch it, while somebody got fed a lie to? Their face? That little war that starts up in your gut? The one where half of you wants to speak, and half of you wants to be anywhere else? Then trust me, this one's going to sit with you. Stick around. Because the choice Imani made in the next handful of minutes detonated the entire course of her life, and she had no idea it was coming. Go ahead and drop a comment. Right now. Would you have spoken up? Lock your answer in, because by the time we get to the end, the truth might be something you didn't expect about yourself. Table 9 was buried in the farthest corner of the Vireo, in the private room behind the face. Frosted glass, a sealed pocket of the restaurant, you paid extra to use precisely because nobody asked what happened inside it. 3 men sat around it. One conversation moved between them. And in the center lay a contract, neat and bound, as harmless-looking as a folded napkin and twice as lethal. Management had put Imani on that room on purpose, out. Of everyone on staff, she was the one who could be in a space without anybody, remembering she'd been there. 8 months she'd done this. 8 months of setting down entrees that cost more than 2. Days of her wages, of being looked through by men who never once met her eyes, of riding the bus home to a single room off Cleveland Avenue, where the only thing that waited up for her was a billing statement from Grady Memorial, her mother's name across the top, a number along the bottom that shut her throat every time she let herself read it. Invisibility. Wasn't a talent, it was survival. She could not afford to lose this job. But every now and then, a lie comes through so loud, so naked, that even a woman who's made herself disappear can't keep pretending she didn't hear it. The man holding court at the head of the table was Lachlan Pierce, Australian, north of 50, rich in the worn-out way of a person who'd stopped being impressed by his own money. Decades ago, he moved like a man who'd never heard the word no land on him and hold. To his right sat the younger one, Julian Rowe, all sharp lapels and a smile so smooth you'd shake his hand twice before your instincts caught up and told you not to. And directly across from the pair of them, unmoving, sat Yoon Suk Jin, holding a stillness that didn't read as calm so much as command, the kind a man only carries when nothing in the room can touch him. Imani noticed him the instant he came off the elevator. There was no not noticing him. Early, 40s, Korean, in a charcoal suit so unremarkable and so perfect it had probably cost more than every single thing she owned added together. He walked in like the room had been his for years, and the rest of them were guests he was tolerating. At his shoulder came a wide, quiet man named Jang, who took up a spot near the door without a word from anyone and stayed welded to it all night. She took the drink order. Suk-jin gave his in Korean. Julian Rowe passed it to her in English. Without once glancing up from his phone screen, she noted it down, turned to go, and that should have been all of it. Another nothing moment folded into a shift made of nothing. Moments. But as she pivoted away, the older man on Suk-jin's left, a German attorney, named Stefan Brandt, said 6 words under his breath that put ice down the back of her neck. Diese Zahlen ergeben keinen Sinn. These numbers make no sense. She didn't stop walking. Her thoughts stopped for her. Now, here's what not one soul at Table 9 could have guessed about the quiet woman topping off their water. There'd been a version of Imani Carter who never owned an apron. Rewind 3 years, and she was among the most requested certified interpreters anywhere in the Southeast. 7 languages lived in her mouth: English, German, French, Italian, Mandarin, Arabic, Portuguese. And she made her living standing dead center inside the highest stakes deals. In the country, for embassies, for firms whose names you'd recognize, for corporations that moved money like weather. She'd had her name etched on an office door. She'd had a future. You could see from across a room. And then came Wesley, the partner, the one person she'd handed her trust to without reservation. For 18 months he'd been quietly hollowing out their company, twisting translations to favor the dirtiest clients on their books, and when the whole structure finally caved, he'd arranged it so that hers was the only name. Fused to every poisoned document. Her license? Gone. Her clients? Gone. The savings? Gone. And when her mother Florence got sick, even the room to mourn any of it was gone too. So she put on the white apron, taught herself to vanish, and spent every shift trying not to. Remember that she could hear 7 languages the way other people hear melody. Not just the words, the whole architecture underneath them. The flinch, the lie, the truth, a person, buries inside the sentence they don't quite finish. She was at the sideboard, going through the motions of straightening linen, when Julian Rowe told his first real lie of the night. Stefan Brandt had leaned in and raised a clean, professional objection in German about a single clause. Clause 7. Asset reversion in the event of a third-party default, he stated, without theatrics, that it left the lead investor dangerously exposed, legally speaking, and that no part of his conscience would let him greenlight a signature until it had been rewritten. Julian Rowe turned to Yoon Sok-jin, beaming, and told him in Korean that the German found the framework elegant and had no concerns about the timeline. Imani heard both versions land. Nothing in the room so much as flinched, no gasp. Lachlan Pierce gave an agreeable little nod. Suk-jin took the translation in with that flat, unreadable stillness and let out a small sound of assent. And Imani stood there clutching a stack of folded cloth, feeling a thing reignite in her chest that had been cold for 3 years. She knew this scene. She'd been a permanent resident of this exact machine, just standing in a different spot inside it. The only thing left undecided was what she'd do now that she was watching it from here. She set the linen down. No flourish, no announcement. Just put it on the sideboard, the way you put down anything you've quietly decided to stop pretending is keeping your hands busy. And she faced table 9. Her coworker, Deja, snagged her by the wrist as she went by. 6 wants to know about their starters, and Pace's been circling the floor like a shark all night. Do not hand him a reason, Imani. Cover me, Imani said. It wasn't really a question. Deja read whatever was in her face and let her arm go. Imani crossed back toward the private room at her usual pace, level, deliberate, the pace of a woman nobody clocks. She refreshed Stefan Brandt's water, slid an untouched bread plate a fraction to the left, and tuned her ear all the way up. Brandt had circled back to the same point, still in German, still composed, but with a wire of tension under it now, the strain of a man who keeps flagging the same problem and keeps getting answers from a different conversation entirely. He pressed one finger flat against a specific page and tapped it twice. The profit split. That was his sticking point. 50-50 was the agreement everyone had shaken hands on in principle. 50-50 was what every draft before this one had said in plain language. But the contract on the table, the one Lachlan Pierce was nudging Suk-jin toward signing before the starters even hit the table, read 60-40 in Pierce's favor. tucked deep into subsection language built on a bet. The bet that nobody on the other side read German closely enough to catch it, or cared enough to make noise. Brandt caught it. Brandt cared. Brandt was making noise, as much noise as a man like that ever makes. And Julian Rowe turned and told Sok-jin the lawyer was complimenting the wine and curious whether it had come from Australia. Imani put the water pitcher down. She thought about Florence, her mother, propped up in a bed at Grady with a line in the back of her hand, who switched on a bright fake smile the second her daughter came through the door so Imani would never see the size of the pain. Underneath it, Florence, who'd held down 2 jobs across 16 years to get her through school. Florence, who'd applauded at her certification ceremony like the woman crossing. The stage had just won a title. Florence, who through all of it, Wesley, the courtroom, the savings burning down to nothing, the slow shift from planning a life to outlasting a single afternoon, had never once told her daughter to make herself small enough to fit the life she'd been handed. And she thought about Wesley, that unbothered, easy smile he'd given her across the conference table the morning her whole world tipped over, the smile of a man who'd already settled on her as the fall guy and slept fine the night before, she thought. About a courtroom, and what it does to a person who speaks 7 languages to sit there, understanding every precise word being spoken against her and being able to stop exactly none of it. She had been Stefan Brandt before, raising the alarm in a language nobody in the room would honestly repeat, watching the table nod and roll forward while she screamed into a quiet that only she could hear. She was done with the quiet. She squared her uniform, pulled one slow breath all the way down, and walked into the private room, carrying the particular steadiness of a woman who has already tallied the bill and chosen to pay it in full. She didn't go to Lachlan Pierce. She didn't go to Julian Rowe. She walked straight to Yoon. Sok-jin. She came in close on his side of the table and leaned down, respectful, unhurried, her voice tuned so low it never escaped the 4 of them. Mr. Yoon, I apologize for stepping in. I'm aware it isn't my place. 4 heads turned at once. Pierce's face went from startled to annoyed inside a single heartbeat. Julian Rowe locked up with the very specific stillness of a man who has just felt the floor move and is calculating, fast, whether he can still get off it, clean. Sok-jin simply looked at her. His face surrendered nothing. Not irritation. Not interest. Nothing she could pull a read off of. But he didn't dismiss her. No raised hand, no turning away. He just waited, with the patience of a man who has learned over a long and dangerous life that the thing worth hearing in any room almost always walks in from the corner nobody was guarding. Your translator has not relayed a single one of Mr. Brandt's objections accurately in the last 20 minutes, Imani said. The German attorney has raised 2 specific problems with this contract, Clause 7, asset reversion on third-party default, which he says leaves the lead investor exposed to unacceptable legal risk, and the profit split, which he has confirmed is written as 60-40 in Mr. Pierce's favor against a 50-50 agreement made. In principle, the hush that dropped over the table had mass to it. Lachlan Pierce settled, back in his chair, unhurried. She's a waitress. Clause 7, Imani said again, eyes still on. Sok-jin alone, voice still even. Mr. Brandt's words, exactly, were that his conscience won't. Let him recommend a signature until it's amended. Your translator told you he was happy with the timeline. Stefan Brandt had frozen solid. He was staring at Imani with an expression she'd worn herself once, the gutted relief of a person who's been shouting into what they were sure was an empty room and just heard a voice answer back. He spoke German, slow, certain. She is correct. Every word she has said is true. Imani translated it before a single person could. Ask her to. He says I'm right. Every word of it. Seokjin still hadn't shifted, hadn't released her face from his attention. His eyes were dark and gave nothing back. And from this distance, she could finally tell that the blankness was a performance, that underneath it, something had begun to move, something she couldn't name yet. He rotated his head, slowly, toward Julian Rowe. He said nothing. Nothing was required. Rowe's mouth opened, took one look at the man's face, and shut again. Get out, Lachlan Pierce said, except he wasn't aiming it at Imani. He was aiming it at Rowe, and the smooth confidence he'd strolled in, wearing, had drained right out of him. Jang pulled the door open. Julian Rowe collected his jacket and walked out without a syllable. The door swung shut behind him with a small, polished click, and somehow that soft sound carried more finality than any slam. In the quiet that came after, Yoon Suk-jin finally let his gaze fall from Imani. He looked down at the contract on the table. Then he raised his eyes to Lachlan Pierce, and the look he wore was so still and so complete that the Australian actually adjusted himself in his seat. Imani took a step back. Her part was over, more than over. By any honest accounting, she was about to lose this job, and she'd already made peace with it somewhere in the stretch. Between lifting the water pitcher and walking through that frosted glass, some choices cost what they cost. But as she turned to leave, Seok-jin spoke for the first time since she'd come to his side, Korean, low, slow, not directed at anyone in the room. The kind of thing a man says half to himself. Jang, by the door, caught it, and something behind his face moved, a hair. Imani didn't have the words for it, but she felt the shape of it, the way you feel a chord in your chest a half second before your mind can name the note. She walked out of the private room and back into the open floor of the Vireo, with its low, golden glow and its costly quiet and its gorgeous indifference. The manager was already standing on the other side of the glass, waiting. His name was Roland Pace, and across 8 months, Imani had never once watched the man so much as glisten. Roland prized his composure the way other men prized their portfolios. It was the entire load-bearing wall of who he believed himself to be, and right now, he was sweating through it. My office, he said, barely above a breath. Now. She trailed him across the dining room, past the candle flames and the soft live piano and the table after table of oblivious money slicing into appetizers, into the cramped office, tucked behind the host stand. He closed the door and turned on her. Do you have the slightest, he began, then cut himself off, pressed 2 fingers to his temple, and restarted. Do you have any conception of who is sitting at table 9? A man getting robbed, Imani said. Roland just looked at her. That is not, you cannot, Imani. His voice dropped to a place she hadn't known it could reach. That is Yoon Suk-jin. Do you grasp what I'm telling you? Do you grasp what that name carries in this city? She grasped a great deal more than he could have imagined, but she kept her face plain and let the man empty himself out. 23 years I've given to hospitality in this town, Roland said. 23, and I have never, not one time, had a staff member walk into a private engagement and plant herself in the middle of a conversation between guests. He pulled his jacket straight. His hands gave him away. You are a gifted server, Imani. I need you to hear that I mean it. But there's nothing I can do here. I know, she said. He blinked at her. You. I know, she said, again, holding his eyes steady. You have to fire me. I'm sorry, he said. And the strange thing was, she believed him. She gave one nod and went to gather her things. Deja intercepted her at the lockers, eyes wide, practically humming with the charged energy of someone who's just stood 3 feet from something enormous. Imani, what happened? Back there? Roe came out looking like a man who'd met his maker. Pierce hasn't twitched in. 10 minutes, and the whole floor is saying, I'm heading home, Deja. But what did you? Look after yourself. She pulled the girl into a fast, real hug, the kind you give when you can't promise you'll see them again, then picked up her bag and stepped out into the flash. Atlanta night. The city swallowed her up exactly the way it always did, warm and noisy and utterly unconcerned. Peachtree pulsed with Friday in full swing, music leaking from a doorway. Down the block, headlights smearing past, the whole machine humming along, supremely. Uninterested in the fact that Imani Carter had just torched the best-paying job she'd held in, 3 years with nothing to land on and a hospital bill back home, patient as a creditor, she stood on the sidewalk under the tower and let herself do the one thing she'd been refusing to do for far too long. She felt it, every part of it, the dread and the bone-tiredness and the grief, and threaded under all of it, stubborn, ridiculous, completely without justification, something that bore a strong resemblance to relief. She had told the truth. Whatever the bill, she had told it. She set off for the MARTA station. She didn't pick up on the man behind her until she came, around the second corner, and only then because his shape slid across a black storefront window, a tall figure matching her pace at about 20 feet, never gaining, never falling, away. She turned left where she'd meant to turn right and took the longer route. He turned. With her, her heart kicked up, but she kept her gait flat, her chin forward, her thinking sharp. Then, a second man peeled out of a recessed doorway directly ahead of her, and her stomach went straight through the concrete. She stopped. They came at her unhurried, almost lazy, which was a far worse thing to watch than urgency would have been. The one in front was thick across the shoulders, blunt in the jaw, wearing the expression of a man performing a chore he'd done plenty of times. His hand started for the inside of his coat. From there, it all happened too fast to track. 2 more men arrived out. Of nothing. That was the only way she could ever explain it after the fact. Out of nothing. 1 second the street held 4 bodies, the next it held 6, and the 2 new ones moved, with a quiet, clinical economy that flipped the entire situation upside down in well under a minute. Nothing brandished, nothing shouted, only motion, exact and total. And then the pair who'd been hunting her were simply not there anymore, steered off, subtracted, like terms in a problem somebody had just finished solving. Imani stood on the pavement, pulling air harder than she wanted to let on. On the ground, right where the first man had been. Planted, lay 1 white business card, face down. She bent and turned it over. A phone, number, nothing else. The stock was heavy and expensive under her thumb, and that told her everything she needed to know about whose hand it had come from. She scanned the empty block in both directions. Her phone went off. No caller ID. She watched it ring 3 full times before she picked up. Miss Carter, calm. Korean accented English, level and unrushed. The voice of a man who'd scripted every word in his head before his thumb ever hit the button. Are you hurt? She breathed out long and slow through her nose. No? Good. A pause that carried weight. Those men are Spencer Walsh's, Sukjin said. Lachlan Pierce's vice president. The one who built tonight's arrangement. He decided you were a person who needed discouraging from saying anything more about what she'd overheard. A second pause. He will not get the chance again. Imani looked down at the card. So you had eyes on me. I had people. Close by, he said. The gap between the 2 phrasings was narrow and entirely on purpose. Is that different? Yes, he said. It is. She pressed her lips flat. The night hummed on. Around her, high overhead, the Buckhead skyline glittered, cold and beautiful and oblivious to anything occurring down at street level. Why? She asked. The silence stretched longer than the others. Because, Sok-jin said, honest people are hard to come by and very easy to lose. She had nothing to put against that. She wasn't certain anything existed that, and could. There's a Korean restaurant in Doraville, he said. Hwaru, you won't find it on a map. Be there tomorrow evening. 7 o'clock. A beat. Please. That word came down. Differently than everything before it, like it had taken something out of him to spend it. Like, it wasn't a coin he handed out often, and he knew it, and he wanted her to know it too. She turned the card once more in her fingers. I'll think about it, she said, and ended the call, before he could put anything after it, and stood alone on the Buckhead sidewalk with her. Heart doing things she had no vocabulary for yet. Then she went to her mother. Florence was awake when Imani reached Grady, sitting up against the pillows with an old movie playing on her tablet at a whisper of volume. She looked up as her daughter came in, and read her face the way she'd been reading it for 29 years. All of it. Accurately. With no need for a word of setup, she patted the blanket at the edge of the bed. Imani sat, and laid the whole night out for her. Florence listened without interrupting once. A discipline she'd honed raising a child who needed her listening far more than her advice. When Imani ran out of story, the only sounds in the room were the soft beep of the monitors and the muted voices on the screen. Florence stayed quiet a moment. Then, who sent the men to? Keep you safe? Imani looked at her own hands. The man from the restaurant. The dangerous one. A pause. Yes. Florence gave a slow nod. The way you nod when something you'd already half known has just been confirmed. And tomorrow, are you going? To go and meet him? Imani turned the card over and back and over again. I haven't decided. Florence studied her daughter for a good long while. Then she picked the tablet, back up, eased the volume a notch higher, and set it calm and plain and final. Yes, you have. Hwaru wasn't on Google Maps. Imani checked 3 separate times. She fed in the address. Jang had texted that morning. The same no-name number. No hello. Just a Doraville Street. And a time, and got back nothing at all. No business listing, no reviews, no photographs. Just a quiet, almost residential block in the middle of Atlanta's Korean community, where the air carried sesame oil and charred meat and some faint, sweet, floral note underneath she couldn't quite identify. She nearly turned the car around twice on the way. The first time came on I-85, when the level-headed part of her, the part that had outlived betrayal and bankruptcy and a fraud investigation with her name welded to it, reminded her, plainly and without flinching, that she was a woman with $9 in checking, a sick mother, no income, and no earthly reason to be driving toward a meeting with a man whose name turned restaurant managers into sweating wrecks. The second time came after she'd parked, when she sat behind the wheel for 4 straight minutes, staring at the unmarked door of a building that could have been almost anything. A house, a community hall, a very quiet address where problems got handled in ways that never reached the 10 o'clock news. Then she heard her mother again. Yes, you have. She opened the car door. The restaurant door opened before her knuckles ever found it. Naturally, Jang stepped clear of it without a sound and waved her in with the economy of a man who used motion only, when words would be wasteful. She followed him down a slim corridor that smelled of barley, tea and cedar, and it gave way, with no warning, onto a room that pulled her up short. It was beautiful. That was the part she hadn't seen coming. Not lavish the way the Vireo was. Lavish, all glass and spectacle, and look at what wealth can do. Something quieter than that. Light pooled low from paper lanterns. The walls were dark timber. A single long table stood. Simply set, 2 cups of tea already poured, a little ceramic dish of banchan she didn't recognize beside them. Ink paintings hung on the walls, the traditional kind, the kind a hand spends years learning and decades perfecting, the kind of room that tells you its owner cares about things money can't rush. Yoon Suk-jin was already seated. He rose when she came in. That landed harder than the room had. A man like that, in a room like that, standing, for a server from off Cleveland Avenue. He gestured to the chair across from his and waited for her to take it before he lowered himself back down. Jang folded himself against the far wall and became part of the architecture again. Sok-jin looked at her across the table. In the lantern glow, he was a different man than the one from the private room. Still controlled, still exact, still carrying that absolute stillness. That seemed less a mood than a permanent condition, but something had eased a degree. The armor was on, just not fully locked. The look of a man who'd made a deliberate decision. To let one person see a little past it, he spoke in Korean. Jang translated from the wall, even. And toneless as a recording. "You came. You asked," she said. Something stirred at the time. Edge of his mouth. Not a smile. The blueprint for one, maybe. "I ask a great many people for a great many things. They do not all come. I'm not a great many people," she said. This time the not-quite smile got nearer the real thing before he hauled it back in. He raised his tea, drank without hurry, set it down with the precision of a man who never did anything by accident. "Tell me about yourself," he said. She held his gaze, flat and easy. "You already know. You sent someone to dig up every inch of my past, carefully." She watched his face. "For the tell. Correct me if I've got it wrong." A pause. Jang's eyebrows climbed maybe a single millimeter, which she suspected was the most either of them had shown in years. Sok-jin considered her for a moment. "You understood what I said last night, in Korean." "Some of it," she said. "Enough. You speak Korean. Enough to follow. It isn't one of my 7. She wrapped both hands around the warm cup. "But I've sat in enough rooms thick, with enough languages to pick up the corners of nearly all of them. You ought to know that, if there's going to be anything to know. If there's a going forward." He took that in without a flicker. Then, Imani Carter, certified interpreter. 7 languages. Former partner at Carter and Kane Language Services, here in Atlanta. License suspended. 3 years ago, following a fraud case that the evidence now indicates was constructed, top to bottom, by your partner, Wesley Kane, who has since been connected to 2 close variations of the same scheme in 2 other cities. A pause. "You took work carrying plates to keep your mother breathing. Florence, Grady Memorial, 4th floor." The room held. Very still. "You have been surviving," he said, "and there was no cruelty in it, when you ought to have been working." She kept her face fixed. It took something out of her. "Is there a point? Arriving soon?" "Yes." He set the tea aside and met her dead on. "I want you working for me, as my personal interpreter. Every negotiation, every contract, every room where one word and the next are the only things standing between trust and disaster. A beat after last night. I think you understand the price of that gap better than nearly anyone alive." There it was, bare and direct, no ornament around it. She held his eyes a long moment. The lantern. Light shifted between them. Slow. Beyond the walls, Doraville carried on, muffled, a whole world that had no idea what was being settled in this still room. I know what you are, mister. Yoon, she said, quiet, careful, not an accusation, just a fact laid down between them like a cup nobody had filled yet. He didn't blink, didn't sidestep. Yes. My business is complicated, he said. Some of it legal. Some of it considerably less so. All of it mine. His eyes stayed on her. What I'm putting in front of you is legitimate, documented, paid. Properly. You translate, and that is the whole of it. And the day I hear something I don't like. You heard things you didn't like last night, he said. You told the truth, regardless. The almost smile again, closer now, warmer at the edges. I'm betting on that, not bracing. Against it. She dropped her eyes to the tea. The ceramic warmed her palms. She thought about the hospital bill, about Florence, about 3 years of folding herself down into something small and silent and unseen in rooms where she caught every word and offered up none of them. She thought about the way he'd stood when she came through the door. The work would have to stay entirely separate, she said, slow. Whatever else your organization does, I don't see it. I don't know it. I don't put it into another language. Negotiations and contracts. Full stop. Agreed. I name my own rate. Agreed. And the day I hear something at one of your tables that I think is wrong, she lifted her eyes to his. I will say so, to your face, the same way I did last night. Something moved through his expression at that, low and quiet. The kind of change that only shows up when a thing genuinely lands. The look of a man. Hearing a sentence he'd long ago stopped, expecting anyone to say to him, agreed, he said. And his voice on that third agreement came out softer than it had on the first two, as if the word had picked up a different weight somewhere along the way. The room eased into silence, not an awkward one, the kind that arrives when two people have each said something true and are letting it have the space it earned. Then Jang spoke, from the wall, the only unprompted words he'd offered all evening. The tea is going cold. Seokjin looked over at him. Jang looked up at the ceiling. And Imani, for the first time in, longer than she could put a number to, laughed. Real, unguarded, startled out of her by the pure ridiculousness of the moment. A sound so warm and so out of place in that careful room that it seemed to shuffle the air around. Seokjin watched her laugh, and the thing that crossed his face then, quiet and unrehearsed, was the most honest expression she'd seen. On him all night. He broke first, reaching for his tea. We should talk about your compensation, he said, and his voice had bent, just slightly, and she was fairly sure he did. Knew that she'd heard it bend, and neither of them said a single word about that. But the temperature of the room had moved, warm now, and tangled, and full of things that didn't have names attached to them yet. Out in the Doraville evening, Atlanta went right on, loud, and stacked and magnificently unbothered, while inside Huaru, over cooling tea and careful sentences, something quiet and unstoppable quietly got underway. 3 weeks on, Imani Carter sat in a glass-walled boardroom on the 34th floor of a Kana, Midtown Tower, and interpreted a $40 million commercial real estate deal with the same exact quiet she'd once spent on ferrying champagne across a rooftop. New room, new table, the same 2 hands, the same voice. A woman who'd become someone else. Entirely. The deal sat between Seokjin's holding company and a group of Atlanta. Developers, clean, documented, structured, tight, under the eye of a contract lawyer, Seokjin. Had flown in from Seoul for the express reason that, as Jang had passed along to her, without inflection, Mr. Yoon would no longer use a translator he hadn't picked with his own hand. She rendered every word straight, every objection landed, every clause got examined, every party walked away understood. When it was done, The developer's lead man, a wide Georgian named Hargrove, who'd plainly come in expecting to own the table, leaned back and said, with genuine respect in it, "Miss Carter, I've been doing this for 30 years, and I've never once felt this thoroughly understood by the people across from me." Imani smiled, thanked him, gathered her notes. Over by the door, Suk-jin was shaking Hargrove's hand, but she felt his attention the way you feel the air change before rain, not looking at it directly, just aware of it. There against her skin. She'd been feeling it for 3 weeks. Nobody warns you about that part of agreeing to work. Shoulder to shoulder with a man like Yoon Suk-jin, it wasn't the danger. The danger she'd seen coming, weighed it, filed it, made her peace with the math of it. It wasn't even the way. The chaos of his world occasionally brushed up against the tidy borders of her job. That line she'd held without strain. It was the small things, the ones with no business weighing as much as they did. The way he stood every single time she came into a room. Every time. No exceptions. As though it were just the obvious thing a person did. The way he'd worked out, somewhere across those 3 weeks, precisely how she took her coffee, and had never once said a word about it, just made certain it was sitting there, right, ready. The way he listened when she translated, not with the half-hear attention of a man absorbing data, but with the whole of himself. Like every sentence she shaped was the single most important thing in the room. Because, near as she could tell, to him it was. The way he'd said her name, on the phone that first night, Imani, careful, weighed, like he'd been holding it on his tongue, deciding whether to let it go. She thought about that far more than she'd have confessed to, anyone, herself included. And she thought about the thing Jang had let drop 3 days back, by accident or otherwise. With Jang, you could never be sure that Seok-jin had rearranged his entire negotiating calendar around when she was free, not worked around it. Rearranged it, as in moved things, for her. She hadn't said a word back about it. She'd just tucked it away somewhere quiet and gone back to the page. But it stayed there. It was always there now. The boardroom drained out, assistants scooping up binders, developers peeling away in, little knots of talk, the particular long exhale of a room that's just closed, something that counted. Sok-jin traded last words with Hargrove by the door. Jang appeared at her elbow as she reached for her coat. His sudden arrivals had stopped startling her, which she figured was its own kind of adjustment she should probably look at more closely sometime. "Mr. Yoon would like a word," Jang said, "if you can spare one." She could spare one. She told herself she was only lingering out of professional courtesy. The argument didn't fully convince her. The room emptied down to the two of them, plus Jang, back at his post by the fine door with the flawless invisibility of a man who'd mastered being present and gone at the same instant. Privately, Imani thought Jang would have made a remarkable waitress. Sok-jin stood at the floor-to-ceiling glass. Atlanta unrolled below them, immense, and, shining in the slant of late afternoon, the downtown spires dissolving into leafy residential blocks, into rooftops, into the far green smear of the suburbs. A city built in layers, in contradictions, in people leading lives that never touched inside the very same miles. He didn't turn around at first, just looked at it. "You did well today." "I did my job," she said. "Yes." A pause. "You always do." He came around from the window and looked at her across. The cleared-out room. That is rarer than it should be. She kept her portfolio against her chest, kept her face professional, kept everything she'd been hauling around for 3 weeks precisely where she'd packed it, filed, quiet, handled. "Was there something you needed, Mr. Yoon?" He reached inside his jacket and produced a small envelope, cream-colored, sealed, her name written across the front in that precise, weighed hand she Recognized at once. The same hand as the back of the business card. 3 weeks gone. He crossed the floor and held it out. She looked at the envelope, then up at him. "What is this?" "Something I should have said another way the first time," he said, and didn't have the English to carry. Her heart did a thing she declined to acknowledge. Jang could have translated it. "No," he said simply. He couldn't. She took the envelope. Their fingers didn't brush. It was thin. 1 page in it. Maybe less than that. The thin slice of air between their hands as she took it had a physical quality to it, like a front rolling through. She raised her eyes to him. He was near enough now that she could see the exact texture of his attention, that total, unshielded focus he turned on her when he thought she wasn't watching. Except, she was always watching. She'd been watching for 3 weeks and pretending otherwise, with steadily failing results. Imani. The way he said it, every time, like the choice of which syllable to lean on actually mattered. She took 1 small step back. 1. Necessary. "I'll read it," she said, later. Something passed across his face, just a flash of it, so unguarded. It nearly took her apart. Not hurt, exactly. More like a man who'd held something true out, into open air, and was standing perfectly still to learn what would become of it. He nodded. Once, and stepped back to give her room. She walked to the door and stopped with a hand on the frame. She didn't turn around. She didn't trust her face, pointed his way. "Thank you," she said. "For today." The deal was fair. Both sides left with what they came in for. That counts. A pause. "It counts more than you realize," he said, low, "that you're the reason it does." She left. The descent was 34 floors of standing dead still, the envelope clasped in. Both hands unopened. The lobby, the revolving door, the warm Atlanta air against her face. She walked a block and stopped beneath a magnolia whose roots had split the sidewalk wide open and just kept right on growing anyway. Very Atlanta, she thought. Very Atlanta. And she opened the envelope. 1 card inside. Cream. Thick. His writing. 4 words this time. Korean. She read them slowly. Her lips moved with them. The translation built itself in her mind as easily as drawing breath. 7 languages living in her like a second skeleton, always there, always holding her upright. 4 words. Her eyes fell shut. The magnolia shifted overhead in the late warm breeze. Somewhere down the block, a street. Musician was working something low and tender out of a saxophone, a melody with no aim. To it, just sound moving through warm air, hunting for a place to settle. Her phone rang. She knew before she looked. Knew it the way you come to know the things that have quit being surprises and started being inevitable, she answered. Silence first, just the soft presence of him on the other end. Over 3 weeks, she'd learned. The grain of his silences. This one didn't match any of them. Quieter, more open. "You read." "It," he said. Not a question. He always knew. She looked up at the skyline, the city vast and stacked and indifferent and gorgeous, doing what it always did, carrying every contradiction. Inside itself, and never once apologizing for it. Seok Jin. His name in her mouth for the first time. She heard the precise instant it reached him, the barely there break in his breathing. Down the line. First time. He knew it was the first time. "You can't write things like this," she said softly. "Not to me." A silence, long and full and shaking with everything the two of them had left unsaid across 3 weeks of professional distance and chosen restraint and coffee. That was always exactly right. "I know," he said, his voice lower than she'd ever heard it go. The armor entirely gone now, just a man on a phone who'd written 4 words in his own language because English wouldn't hold the thing he had to say. Then why did you— She whispered. The saxophone down the block reached for a note so clean it nearly hurt. Because, he said, I have stood in every kind of dangerous room a person can stand in. Rooms with guns, rooms with lawyers, rooms where one wrong word ends everything in it. A pause so long she counted her own pulse inside it. And I have never, not once, been as afraid as I am right now. The magnolia stirred. The saxophone drew breath. Atlanta cradled, the two of them without ever knowing it had. Imani pressed her lips together, looked at the 4 words in her hand, felt the precise outline of the choice in front of her. What it would cost, what it would overturn, what it would require her to walk into with no promise of anything beyond the fact that it was real. Whatever this was, it was real. She folded the card, slow, and slid it into her pocket, against her heartbeat. I'm going to see my mother, she said at last. A pause. I know. And then she stopped. Let the "and then" hang there in the open between them, unfinished, a question with a door built into it. She hung up. She stood under the magnolia on the broken sidewalk, one palm flat over the pocket where the card lay, 4 Korean words, warming up through the fabric into her hand. She started walking. And if there was something in her stride that hadn't been in it 3 weeks earlier, when she walked out of the Vireo holding nothing and everything in the very same breath, well, Atlanta had always been a city packed full of stories. This one was only getting started, and if you've stayed with me all the way to here, then you already know this story is far from finished. Imani's got 4 Korean words tucked in her pocket. If you want part 2, where their 2 worlds finally crash all the way together, where Florence learns the truth, and where somebody from Imani's past walks back through the door to set fire to everything, hit that like button and leave a comment down below. Tell me what you think those 4 Korean words said. Best answer gets pinned to the top. Subscribe if you're not already. A brand new story every week, and I'll see you in part 2.